Hey everyone, Andrew here. This video is the last of my three-part series on Laravel's current authentication ecosystem, exclusively covering the Passport package. If we take a look at the documentation page, Passport provides a full OAuth2 server implementation for your Laravel application in a matter of minutes. If you're unsure of what that means, or don't have experience with OAuth2, you can find it used whenever you sign into a web app using some kind of other external service. For example, if I was to sign in with GitHub on this platform, I'm prompted with a pop-up detailing what information that GitHub will allow them to access. After I hit this Authorize button, they are given an authentication token that they use to retrieve the information that I've approved from GitHub and build my profile off of it. This is what we can implement on our Laravel app with Passport, with our application acting as GitHub in this scenario. Alright, let's get started. I have here a Laravel application that I've set up already. I've also created a test route and seeded it with a little bit of data, like a blog. There's posts, and each one is attributed to a specific user through their name. However, we don't know which one of these is ours. What I'd like to do is create a way for a third-party application to request an authenticated user's email address and posts through a secure OAuth2 API using Passport, and maybe even be able to create some new posts for them as well. Before we install this package, you'll notice this section on the documentation titled Passport or Sanctum. Sanctum, as you might know, is another official Laravel package for authenticating with session cookies or bearer tokens. I covered it in a previous video, which you can check out here if you'd like. What your decision should boil down to is how you or others plan on using your application's API. If it's going to be called by something like a companion single-page application or a mobile application, it might be better to stick with Sanctum. Setting it up is pretty straightforward. It works out of the box with SPAs on the same domain, and creating and managing authentication tokens doesn't take much work. There are some downsides though, particularly if you'd like to gate and alert your end users as to what data will be passed to a third-party application, having them approve it first. If that increased security sounds like something you'd want, it might be better to continue with Passport. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's get started actually installing it. So from our command line at the project root, we'll have to run composer require Laravel Passport. And once that finishes up, we'll need to run the migrations using Artisan. Now my local environment here is using Docker, so you'll see for Artisan commands, I'll be using the DCR command, which is a shortcode on my system for Docker Compose Run. And finally, we'll have to run an Artisan command, passport install, to get the scaffolding for Passport set up. Okay, that looks like it went through well. So our next step will be to take a few lines of code and add them to our user model and routes. For the user model, we'll need to implement the Laravel Passport has API tokens trait. And in the auth service provider class, we'll have to call this passports routes static method, which will scaffold out all of the necessary endpoints that we need. Finally, at the bottom of our config auth file, we'll have to change the API driver from token to passport. Okay, now this should be everything that we need to install in order for our users to start using Passport. What they'll have to do though is create a client, which is an application that they intend to call this API from. Using our analogy earlier, if we are GitHub, then the client would be the site that I'm trying to connect with or log in with GitHub. In order to view and create a user's clients, Passport has a few options out of the box. We can either use this Artisan Passport client command, which we can run in our terminal. There's also this JSON API that Passport provides to us as well. Instead of utilizing that client command, we can use a few endpoints to create a front end and help manage our users' clients. The API, though, is guarded by both web and auth middlewares, so it can only be called from our own application and not from an external source. We're going to take a slightly different approach here, but using the same endpoints and methods, we'll be able to list and create new clients for our particular user. Heading back into our Laravel app, I've already taken the liberty of installing Breeze, which is an authentication starter kit for Laravel. This allows us to easily register or sign a user in and provides a pretty small dashboard starter kit. Let me just register a new user real quick. Hit register. And we're in the dashboard. What I'd like to do next is create a new route that'll show the clients associated with our user and give them a form in order to create a new one. First, I'm going to copy this dashboard blade template to clients.blade.php. And I'm just going to scaffold out something basic with the included Tailwind CSS library that Breeze provides. And now we'll also need a route and controller method in order to display this view and the client's data associated with it. In our routes web file, we'll create a new one called clients. Actually, dashboard clients. And in the view, we'll also return all of the clients associated with this particular user. All that's left to do is add this new route to our navigation header. All right, let's head back to our browser, refresh, and try it out. Well, we have no clients, so this is exactly what we're expecting. But what I'd also like to do is add on this page a form in order to create a new client. So let's create another one of these cards and create a form whose action is going to be OAuth clients. This route correlates to the one that's in the Passport documentation and should allow us to easily create a new client whenever the correct information is passed through. For that, we will need two things, a name and a redirection URL. Let's refresh. And it's all right, but let's clean it up a little bit more. Okay, that's slightly better. It's what we can work with. So now what we should be able to do is create a new client with a name, like my client, and a redirect URL, which is what the user will be sent back to whenever they've authenticated against our application. So for this, let's call it Laravel app.test/callback. Hit create client, and we've gotten back our client with a secret and a redirect URL. Now, normally this would be called through some kind of asynchronous method like Axios or Fetch. Purely for the sake of simplicity and time, I've called this directly through a form on the dashboard. So all we have to do then is go back to our dashboard clients route. And we now see that we have a client along with a callback URL for it. We'll also probably want to display that secret just in case somebody needs to see it more than once. So underneath our redirect, we'll also call client secret. So now if we go back to our browser and refresh, we'll see the secret underneath the client as well, which we'll need in order to authenticate against our API. At this point, this is basically all we need in order to get started with authenticating against this API. So what is this Laravel app.test? Well, it's another external application. It could use Laravel, but it could be a vanilla PHP project, a WordPress site, a mobile app, or anything that will be needing data from our API. Again, calling our analogy from earlier, if the application that we just worked on and set this up on is GitHub, then this Laravel app.test callback route is what's going to allow our users to sign in with our Laravel application and let us get guarded API data back from it. Instead of creating a separate Laravel app to show you the authentication procedure, I'm going to be doing everything inside of Postman. The reason for this, while it might be a little confusing, is that I would like to keep this tutorial as platform agnostic as possible. I would like you to be able to use the knowledge here on a Laravel app, as well as a mobile application, a Vue SPA, or any other platform that you might need to call an authenticated API from. The first thing that we need to do is call the OAuth authorize route To this, we'll have to add a few query variables. The client ID, the redirect URI, a response type set to code, a scope set to empty, and state. For the client ID and redirect URI, we already know these in our application. Our redirect is Laravel app.test/callback. And our client ID we can make appear by adding another line to our client's applet template, client ID. And each of these I'm going to prefix with what they actually are. Okay, that's a little better. So our client ID is 3, and now all we need is a state. If we look at the Laravel Passport documentation, a state is defined as just a random string of 40 characters that we keep in a session. The reason for that is that after the authentication takes place, is that we use the state variable to determine if the request is authentic. So for now, I'm going to use a state that's pretty easy to memorize. I'm going to use ASDF 10 times. All right, now if we hit send for this and preview, we get back a login form since we are not logged into the application in Postman. So let's log in with the user that we want to authenticate against, our one that we created earlier. Hit login. Okay, maybe this isn't going to work well in Postman for this. Instead, let's copy this whole URL and open it up in our browser. Because we're already authenticated, it's now displaying the screen that was showing when we tried to log in with GitHub earlier. It also looks like it's a little unstyled, but that's because right now, Passport's still using Bootstrap classes when our application is using Tailwind CSS because of the Breeze installation. You can publish these views and edit the styles or the classes yourself through an artisan command. For right now, this works for me. And we have two options, authorize or cancel. So my client is our client name that's pulled in automatically, and it's requesting permission to access my account on Laravel Passport.test. If we hit authorize, what that's going to do is send us to our redirect URL with a token. That token will be used in another call to actually create the authentication token so that we can start grabbing data from our API. Let's hit authorize. And we get an error back that the site can't be reached, which is understandable. I mean, we don't have Laravel app.test up and running right now, but what we do have is this code right here. What we're going to do is copy this, and we're going to use this in subsequent calls in Postman to actually get our authorization token. So now what we have to do is call a new route as a post request. We have to call our Laravel Passport.test app OAuth token. We'll send this over as form data, and we need to include a few variables. Grant type as authorization code, client ID as the same ID of our client from earlier, 3, client secret, which we can copy over later from our application, redirect URI, which is the same URI that we were on earlier, Laravel app.test callback, and code, which was the code given back to us earlier, this long string. Let's copy over our client secret real quick. And when we hit this send button, we get a request back that includes what our token type is, when it expires, and the full access and refresh tokens. Using this access token, we can now make calls to our application's API as an authenticated user. We can get back user information, we can create posts on behalf of that user, and we can do anything that we need to, just like an authenticated user on the front end. Let's copy this token. So to test this out, we can use a route that actually already exists. HTTPS Laravel Passport.test API user. If we take a look at our api.php file, we have this user route already defined by default in Laravel applications, and it's using the Auth API middleware, which means that it's only available to authenticated users. If we go to the Authorization tab and we click Bearer Token, we can paste in our token that we were given back earlier and make this call, getting back our user ID and name. But it doesn't include our email. We want to hide the email addresses of users when they're being displayed through the public API, but through a private API, we would like to show that information, and you can actually do that very simply with Laravel. On the user return request, we can tack on make visible, which asks for an array of attributes that are currently hidden that you would like to display in this particular instance. So for us, that'll be email. If we go back to Postman and refresh, you can now see that our email attribute is displayed. But if we call the public posts API that we were looking at earlier, each user still only displays the ID and name associated with them. Now let's try using this API to create a post on behalf of our user. So we can create a new route in the api.php file, following the same convention as the route above it. Route middleware auth API, get posts new function, request, and we're going to return request user posts, create, request only, title, and content. Kind of a long chain, but it's pretty straightforward. For our request user and the post relationship that's associated with them, we're going to create a new Eloquent model and only pass in 2 attributes from our request array, title and content. Normally we would want to validate these before they're actually added into the model, but for this test, I don't feel like there's really a need to do that. Back in Postman, let's add a new route. Post Laravel Passport.test API post new. Add in our bearer token authorization, which is already set from the last tab. And in the body, we're going to include title, my cool new post, content, look at this cool post. I made it myself. And if we hit send, the post method is not allowed for this route. I did a get here. This should be a post, save, and also what we're going to need to do is in our headers, we should say accept application JSON so that we get back the appropriate response instead of a blob of HTML. So now if we hit send on this, we get back our object, which is a title, content, user ID, and post ID. And if we go back to our browser and view this post object again, we can scroll to the bottom, see our new post, and the user who created it, ours, authenticated by the API. If we go back to the original response from Passport when we got our authorization token, we can see this expires in attribute here. What this is the number of seconds that this token lives for. So it looks like right now we have 31,536,000 seconds, which equates to exactly 1 year. That's pretty long for these tokens. Sometimes applications would like them to be that long. Sometimes applications would like them to be shorter, maybe just a day or two, or even a few hours long. For that, you're probably going to want to refresh the token fairly frequently in order to make sure that your user doesn't have to continuously log in or authorize your application against subsequent calls. With Passport, that's fairly simple. All we need is this refresh token here. And we have to make a call again to this OAuth token endpoint in our application that's using Passport. For the grant type, we change this to refresh token. And then instead of code, we have refresh token and the token that was provided to us. Now, if we hit send, we get back another token with the same expiration time, a new access token string, and a new refresh token string as well. Now, unfortunately, this does invalidate our previous token. So if we go back to this GET request that was using that previous token and hit send, we are now seeing a box that will require us to log into the application before viewing it. And that's actually because we haven't set the accepts header for application JSON. If we do that and hit send again, we just get back a message that says unauthenticated. But if you're doing this from a plain HTTP call, you'll get a redirect to the login screen for your Laravel application that uses Passport. But we can just copy this new authentication token, paste it into our authorization, and everything works again just as expected. There is one more thing that I would like to demonstrate with Passport, and that's creating scopes for your clients and for your authorization tokens. If we take a look at the Passport documentation, there's a section called Token Scopes. What a scope is it allows clients to request a specific set of permissions when requesting authorization to access an account. So for instance, with our application, let's say we want to get back the user's email address to create a profile for them, but we don't want an application to be able to create posts for that user. We can use scopes to do that. So back in our auth service provider class, we can add this Passport tokens can call, which expects an array consisting of identifiers for the scopes and definitions for each scope. Let's head into our code and add that now. So we have two types of scopes that we can use: get email and create posts. So the get email scope can retrieve the email associated with your account, and the create post scope can create posts on behalf of your user. So now, using the same client that we had created earlier, if we head into Postman in the original tab that we were calling this authorization for, we can change this scope from a blank string to get email. Now if we copy this link and open it up in the browser, we can see here now that we have this new line that says this application will be able to. So when I hit authorize, the code that's generated whenever it's called in the API can only retrieve emails associated with my account. It cannot create posts on my behalf. And we can actually change that scope in here from get email to create posts. And it'll now say it can't access my email anymore, but it can create posts on my behalf. And we can actually separate more than one by a space. So we can do create posts, %20, get email. And now we see we can both create posts on behalf of my user and retrieve the email associated with my account. For this though, I don't want to be able to have this application create posts on my behalf. I just want them to be able to get my email address associated with the user who's logged in. So let's authorize it. And we have the callback code. Copy it over. And instead of a refresh token, we're going to do code. Paste in our code. And instead of refresh token, we have authorization code. Hit send. And we get back our access token. Now this token, as it stands right now, will let us do both of these things still. It'll let us create a post, and it'll also let us get an email address. But we want to be able to gate this so that this token and any subsequent tokens made moving forward can only show email addresses and not create posts on behalf of the user. In order to do that, if we head back to the Passport documentation, all we have to do now is check this scope in the middleware with this scopes : helper. In our routes.api file, we can call two middlewares now, auth API and scopes get email for this, and then for our post new route, auth API scopes create posts. So now if we save this and try to access our API again, oh, we forgot one step. We need to add these scopes and scope middlewares to the kernel.php file. And there we go. We can see that we're still getting back our user with the email address because that authentication token is in our scope. But if we try to create a new post for our user using this same token, and let's change the body of the post a little bit. And if we hit send on this, we get back a message saying invalid scopes provided, along with the whole trace for the exception. So this request was blocked, a 403 forbidden was given back as the response code, and we cannot proceed with creating a post for our user with this token. Alright, that's about it for this video. There's more to Passport than I mentioned here, like PKCE or personal access tokens, but this should be a good base for a lot of use cases with this incredible package. OAuth2 can be a complicated and complex standard, so I hope I've helped pave the way for learning more about this versatile and useful method for authenticating your APIs. Huge thanks to my GitHub and Patreon sponsors, YouTube Elite members, and everybody else who continues to support these videos. As always, if you have any questions about this or any other web development topics, please feel free to reach out to me in the comments or on my Twitter linked below. Thanks for watching.